You're probably reading this because you like creepypasta stories. I know I, in particular, love Pokemon related ones. My favorite so far has to be the one about Silver's point of view in the games. Tarnished Gold, I think it was called. I've read many of them, but most, if not all seem to have something in common. They're all about a previously owned game that they found or bought through some method, whether or not these stories are true. I haven't had the luck to stumble upon any of these supposedly hacked games, even though I collect the old Game Boy cartridges and many of them were used. The closest I've come to playing one for real is the fan-created Lost Silver. While browsing through the web, I noticed someone made a comment about how all of the Pokemon creepypastas are about the old games, and none of them are 3rd or 4th gen. So I had an idea. I have a college friend who is studying game programming and hopes to make his own games someday. But he's also an excellent hacker. He's been able to come up with many action replay codes that do unusual and generally useless things. But I find it all to be very interesting. He's even created a few for Pokemon, although mostly for his own benefit. After I got said idea, I called him and wondered if he'd be able to make a hack for my Heart Gold game. I have a copy of both Heart Gold and Soul Silver, but Soul Silver was my main game, and so I had no useful Pokemon or items on the Heart Gold cartridge. I also mentioned it would be a sickly humorous way to pass the time until the English release of Black and White. He wasn't sure how long it would take, but he told me he would love to try such a challenge. Since I had no other means of reaching him, he lives on campus several hours away. I mailed him my Heart Gold cartridge. After 3 months later, I received it back in the mail, along with a letter which basically stated that he was sorry it took so long because he was busy with college work and creating a hack for the game was time-consuming. He also advised me to stop playing the game if I was too freaked out to continue, and also left a little note of all of the events which were supposed to take place in the game if curiosity bested me. I was both eager and nervous to start the game. After loading it into my Nintendo DS and starting up the power, I noticed something odd. Rather than the usual Pokemon Heart Gold Nintendo on the select menu, it said Pokemon Plague with ellipses as the publisher rather than Nintendo. I didn't know why it was called Plague at the time, but it was definitely something eerie. The game started up as normal, with no changes to the opening animated sequence except when the 3 legendary beasts were supposed to appear. There was simple blackness. Even the very end where Suicune was supposed to be looking up at the sky, Suicune was missing. I checked the trainer's profile. The character's name was Gold, no suspicion there as I actually named my character that, but the numbers of hours played was 000 minutes and 00 seconds, and the number of Pokemon in the Pokedex was 0. It said I had 16 badges. When I loaded the game, Gold was standing in his room, with a Raikou standing beside him as all Pokemon in the first slot of the party do in this game. There was no music. The room looked normal save for the various spots of black on the wall. The whole room, in fact, seemed darker as if it was nighttime. The Raikou had some black patches on him that weren't his stripes. I checked my party. The unnamed Raikou was poisoned with 4 HP and was accompanied by a genderless Murkrow and a haunter named Ghost. When I checked their summaries, there didn't seem to be anything wrong with them. Appearance-wise, this didn't explain Raikou's strange overworld sprite. I walked from the center of the room to the stairs in the top left corner. All of the while, the screen was flickering and making that strange buzzing sound, indicating my poison Pokemon. Before I went downstairs, I checked my bag. No items whatsoever. Just as I went down the stairs, the screen went black and there was a loud crashing noise, like a stone falling. Some text appeared that said, "You took one step too many." After pressing A, the text vanished, and Gold's sprite faded in. I took a few steps and a dark gray outline appeared behind me. It took me a few moments to realize that this was Raikou's sprite, but entirely black or transparent. I checked my Pokemon again. Raikou's sprite was normal, but had black patches all over him like the overworld sprite in my room. Murkrow still looked normal, but Ghost's sprite had been changed to look like the ghosts from the original Lavender Town. Either a sick joke or my friend was paying homage to whoever wrote Creepy Black. I wandered around aimlessly for only a few moments before I decided to check my map. I was in Johto because apparently Kanto wasn't available yet, but my trainer's sprite indicating where I wasn't there. In addition, the roots look corrupted or decayed with holes and scratches in them, and the map's colors had been doused in reds and browns. There was also a demented-looking Entei sprite in the middle of Violet City. It was the sprite that appeared on the map after the beasts were released from the Brass Tower, but the eyes were pools of black and Entei's face was just as shabby as the map roads. Upon returning to the overworld, I was surprised to see my location had changed, or appeared, I wasn't sure. I was now on a Lineran route, only 2 squares tall, and was heading east. To the west was a steep cliff, which I obviously couldn't get by. There were no trees. The roots were enclosed by rocks. The grass was dark reddish brown. I began to walk a little, and every few steps in the screen would shudder from the poison. Raikou was still walking behind me and had appearance-wise returned to normal, although he did seem to look a little darker. After about 50 steps, I was confused. Shouldn't Raikou had fainted already with only 4 HP? Apparently, yes. When I checked Raikou's stats again, he was fainted, and his battle sprite's body had turned brown. There were black patches all over, and a few places that looked corroded. His head was lowered, and there was purple slime dripping from his jaws and scattered all over his feet. His eyes were missing, and he was left with 2 perfectly round holes. There was no information on him. All of his information was blank save for his attack section. He knew Toxic, Crunch, Spit Up, and Slash. And I knew most of these aren't moves this Pokemon could learn naturally. I immediately switched to Murkrow, who still looked normal at this point. I really didn't want to look at that horrible Raikou. I switched back, but only for a moment, just to listen to its cry. The cry was a normal Raikou cry slowed down with an ugly gurgling sound added to it. Raikou still followed me. I decided for the heck of it to turn around and talk to him. The Raikou made no noise, and a speech bubble appeared with some purple bubbles. Text appeared, and it read, "Raikou is ill with the effects of the plague." I didn't know what this plague was, but with an off feeling I knew that it was the reason why Raikou was so awful. I continued walking for a minute longer or two with no major changes into the environment. Although I could hear some music playing faintly, and it seemed to be gradually increasing in volume with every few steps. I didn't recognize the tune at the time, but it freaked me out. The poison shuddering was still happening. I finally reached the end of the road, which was a hole in the ground in front of another cliff face. With nothing to lose, I stepped into the hole, where my character immediately vanished rather than comically running in place before falling, as what would usually happen. Raikou stayed outside and didn't appear to be following me into the hole. I landed on a single square of cave tile, with rocks scattered around the black void. I checked the map. Gold's sprite was again missing, but the Entei was there, this time in the very middle of the map. The map itself was styled the same as before, but there were random corrupted routes everywhere and no cities. I stood on this square for a few minutes, unable to move. The music was gradually getting louder still, and I could finally recognize it as the 8-bit theme for Ecruteak City. It was being played at a much lower pitch, and the notes were being played as horrible clashing chords. Chords is the best word I could describe it as, since I have little musical knowledge. After a minute or two, the music stopped abruptly with a single deep bell chime, and the screen began to warp in ways I cannot even describe. There were occasional flashes of bright light until the screen turned black and the normal battle music started. Gold's back sprite slid into battle, but there was no opponent. Then suddenly, a rather macabre Entei sprite appeared with a screech and that gargling noise. There was no text announcing that a wild Entei appeared, but there was a box that stated, "Free yourself while you can." Entei's fur was mangled with dark patches of blood, and in several places there were broken bones stabbing from his body. His paws and chest were corralled like Raikou's body was. There were two round eyeballs sitting in his sockets, brown and shriveled, not looking like they should fit in his head. Gold sent out Murkrow since apparently Raikou was gone, and a battle initiated. I have no items, and it wouldn't let me switch out Murkrow for Ghost. Run wasn't even an available option. I could only attack, and Murkrow had one, Fly. Entei was at level 99, so he attacked before my level 5 Murkrow could. Entei used Toxic, which poisoned my Murkrow. After that attack, the screen flashed black for half a second before the battle screen appeared again. Murkrow's back sprite was now splotched black. As I recognized the situation, I began to feel shaken. Murkrow flew up high. The animation was normal, except the background was brown instead of blue when Murkrow vanished. It skipped my turn, and then Entei used Roar. I expected the attack to miss, but it didn't. Instead, the running away sound played, and the text read, "Murkrow has fled." The battle didn't end, though. Instead, Gold said, "Go for it, Raikou," and a poisoned Raikou was sent out. I try not to question how he ended up back on my team. Raikou's back sprite matched his front one, and I almost felt bad because how ill he looked. Out of Raikou's 4 attacks, which I previously mentioned, I chose Crunch since it seemed to be the only one that would do much damage. Entei used Toxic, but it failed since Raikou was already poisoned. Raikou used Crunch. Rather than the fangs appearing from the attack animation, several patches of blood appeared on Entei's arm, with the crunch sound playing each time one appeared. Entei's health dwindled about a quarter. The turn ended and Raikou was hurt by poison, even though his health was already at 0. I was about to use Crunch again, but apparently it had lost all of its PP in that one move. I chose Slash, which went first. It was apparently super affected and knocked Entei's health down to less than half. The Entei sprite then changed. His head lowered and there was several deep red scratches across his neck. Entei used Mirror Move, which caused Entei to use Slash, but rather than hurting Raikou, the attack happened to Entei and his health dropped to be very low. The sprite changed again, and this time his head was lowered to the ground. The eyeballs had rolled into Entei's head, and some purple slime was beginning to dribble from his jaws. Raikou was hurt by poison again, as was Entei, even though he didn't have any status effects. Entei's health bar vanished, and his cry played at a lower pitch, which normally would have indicated that he fainted. But the battle still continued even though I didn't pick a move. Raikou used Spit Up, which did nothing aside from adding a bit more purple slime to the stream from his mouth. Entei used Last Resort. The screen went black and the music stopped. The previous warped Eccotique music played, and I was returned to the overworld, where a single line of gray bricks led me north through the black void and rocks. As I began to move north, I could see that the Pokemon following me was an overworld sprite of Ghost, which confused me because I thought Raikou was in my party and Ghost didn't even have to be selected for battle. Something odd I also noticed was that my trainer sprite seemed darker somehow. A chill went down my spine when I made the connection that looked similar to Raikou's darkened sprite at the beginning. By now the screen had stopped shuddering, and I wasn't sure if this was scary or relieving. I checked my trainer card to see if there was any changes to Gold's image. As I suspected, his skin was splotched black, but there was something different. Half of his face was corroded away, revealing muscle melting into skull. The gym leaders' sprites were all replaced by black squares. I closed that menu and checked my Pokemon. Ghost was not in my party. Instead, I now had a poison Raikou and a seemingly normal Suicune. I checked their sprites. In addition to Raikou's previous rotting figure, his bones were visible, and in places there were muscles and tendons dangling from his body. All of his muscle appeared to be brown and rotten, and there still appeared to be poison vomit at his mouth. Suicune was shiny, and nothing seemed to be wrong with him except he was frozen. Level 100 with full health as well. I decided to switch Suicune to be first in my party, and upon returning to the overworld, I had shiny Suicune follow me. After walking north for a while, the screen began to shudder. There was a blackout, followed by a runaway sound. When the light returned, I startled. Gold was standing on the Mount Silver where Red usually is, but the snow was soaked in a cruel-looking crimson. At the base of the stairs appeared a static overworld sprites for Suicune, colored completely black. The screen flashed black, and when visibly returned, Raikou and Entei were on either side, still looking ill. My character suddenly jumped back, as if he's been poisoned pushed by my rival. He stood just in front of the three dogs, looking up at Red's pedestal, and there was a horrid squeaking noise. The screen darkened gradually until there was no more visibility, just the demented Eccotique theme and that bloody noise. The sound for the attack Crunch began to play multiple times. Every time it sounded, there was a gasping noise, followed by gurgling. The screen remained black, but during the noise sequence, I swear I saw very quick flashes of images. One of Suikun's face with his eyes bleeding and savage teeth. One of a maskless Entei whose face had been replaced by a torn, bleeding muscle. And one of Raikou, whose empty eyes seemed to captivate me for the moment I saw them. A text box appeared. Gold Yu's last resort. A long scream startled, but it was interrupted and the sounds shuddered as if the game froze. It was a continuous awful shriek, and suddenly both screens messed up. The bottom screen was a jumble of pixels, but the top one clearly resembled a face. It was a warped version of Gold's, enlarged to fit the screen, but hatless, and his hair was all over the place. His face looked horrific, and his eyes were round sockets with shriveled brown orbs inside. His mouth was twisting off his face in a grin, and the jaw looking to be falling off. The back of his throat was jammed with purple ooze, which was slowly dribbling past his teeth. The skin was corroded in several places. After this, I immediately closed the DS and the sound stopped. The green light blinked normally, which was a revealing reminder that it was all not real. I shut off the power and took the game out, stuffing it back into the mail pouch it came in. It was the last time I ever loaded up that copy of Hard Gold, or Plague, as the game called it. A few days later, I called my friend, telling him that the hack was impressive but scared the crap out of me. He felt bad about frightening me, but at the same time, I was happy he made such an effective game. I then asked him how he made the very last sprite of the trainer's face, which was very well done, and even though it disturbed me to no end. He immediately freaked out and told me that the sprite wasn't supposed to be in the hack. He apparently made it a while ago for a different project that was scrapped. That project's main focus bore several similarities with this hack, as I later learned, and it wasn't the trainer's face at all. Somehow it got mixed in with the coding of the game, and my friend claimed that he had played through the hack several times and that the last part never happened. Later on, I checked the note he left me of the hack's events, and surprisingly, after Gold Yu's last resort, he was supposed to fall to the ground like Raikou did, and the game mode was set, disallowing anyone to save. The last glitch bit is what set this game off for me. So I sent it back to my friend and told him that he could keep it if he wanted to play around with the coding of Hard Gold at any time. As far as I know, he still has the codes for the Plague hack. But it's so complex that it's hard for regular gamers to use on AR. Who knows? He may have ended up showing other people this hack someday. But for now, he's keeping it a secret.